Do you question your pulse diagnosis? Perhaps the results that you're getting are not the same every single time, or the results that you're getting are not really helping to give a beneficial light on your treatment. If this is you, then today's video is for you because I'm going to talk about something I call the Fulcrum. It is a traditional Japanese medicine foundation, and hint, it's going to have nothing to do with your theory. So let's get into today's video. Hi everyone, my name is Maya Suzuki and I studied pulse and everything else I know about acupuncture at a school in Japan called Toyo ShinKyu Senmon-gakko. So the information I'm going to give you here today is not my personal creation. It's not something I figured out or dreamed up. It's something that I learned while going to school in Japan. Now, if you're interested in learning more about traditional Japanese medicine and really bridging the gap between TCM and traditional Japanese medicine, then I would love for you to check out the quiz in the description box below. That quiz is going to lead you to several different workshops that I have that are easy, very quick, and easy for you to learn from, and it's going to be tailor-made for what stage you are in your practice in relation to traditional Japanese medicine. So go ahead and check that out. It's in the description box below. All right, so let's get into it. The thing that I call the fulcrum is actually not that difficult to do. But before I get into how to utilize the fulcrum and how to do it, let's just talk about some basic understanding of the theory of the pulse. That way we're on the same page. So to do that, I'm going to use my whiteboard here. I'm just going to diagram a little bit out about how I know to use the pulse. Now, this diagram that I'm going to be giving you is actually from the Yashinomichi style of acupuncture and moxibustion. So it is a style that I have learned and that I have not created. So before we get into the fulcrum and how it can really change your practice, I want to just get a common understanding of the theory of the pulse. That way we're on the same page about what we're talking about. So what I'm going to present to you now is actually the diagram and how we look at the pulse through the Yashinomichi style of acupuncture and moxibustion. So again, this is not something that I've created. So when we look at the pulse, I just first want to make a quick understanding that we can look at the pulse and make it very objective, not subjective. If we can just allow the pulse to be more of a visual system rather than something that we put into words, like the pulse was fast and wiry. So if we think about the pulse, and if you follow me on any social media, you probably have seen this picture on my social media. I talk about this quite a bit. I think it is an ingenious way of thinking about the pulse because, again, it's extremely visual is the word, which makes it just a lot easier for us to get on the same page on what is actually happening with the pulse. Now, you'll notice that this is Sun, Guan, and Chur, and over here is Sun, Guan, and Chur as well. That's because we're looking at it like the patient has their hands on their chest, like this, a little bit lower probably, and that we as the practitioner are taking their pulse just like that. So this is actually a visualization of the patient lying down, and because of that, this is going to be the left and then the right side of the client. So again, this side is the left side of the client, and this side is going to be the right hand of the client. Now, of course, we're looking at the radial artery. And so in order to get on the same page about the pulse, we of course need to understand where the pulse should be in that artery. So for most people, we want the pulse to be kind of looking something like this. So most of us, our churs are a little bit lower, and then the guan, and then the sun. I would say normally for people, it does look a little bit more like this though. This is probably a more common presentation you're going to see. We definitely want to see strength in that guan. We want to see a little bit more middle jiao presence on the sun, and chur going to be usually kind of deep simply because we're no longer 14 years old. Now, what I think is quite confusing for a lot of people is that when they go to take the pulse, they're often going to look and feel where the pulse is rather than trying to understand that the pulse is simply where the blood flow is in relation to this radial artery. So our job when we take the pulse is to find where the pulse is in relation to the walls of the artery, not in relation to where the pulse, just to find the pulse and then to see if it's stronger or weaker. And so what that means is if our pulse is in this area, which is ideal, right? That means that we're going to find the pulse very solidly in the center of that radial artery. And even when it pulsates, we're going to feel that it pulses out and comes back in at a nice, even, balanced way. It's not bumping into the wall of the radial artery. When we take the pulse, our job is with our hands to find the boundaries of the radial artery and then to understand that within these boundaries, this is where the pulse is pulsating, right? Now, in order to do that, we need to understand how to use our hands, and that is where the fulcrum comes into play. Now, before explaining the fulcrum, I would love to know if this way of understanding the pulse really resonates with you. Let me know in the comments below. So let's talk about the fulcrum. What I think is so ingenious about this method is it really allows you to have a standardized way of looking at the pulse, and it takes out the variability of your diagnostics. So what does that look and feel like? So the standard way for looking at the pulse is to squeeze with your fingertips to find the top and the bottom of the radial artery, ideally. I know for a lot of people, this topic was not really covered, and so instead what you're finding is just really where the pulse is and where it isn't, and not so much in relation to that artery. But saying that, one of the problems with squeezing is that we have so many muscles in our forearms and in our hands that oftentimes this method can become really inaccurate. Let me explain why. When you squeeze with this many muscles, it's extremely difficult to have the same movement every time that you take the pulse. And so what ends up happening is that on patient A, you have more pressure with your fourth finger. On patient B, you might be leaning too much to the right and therefore have more pressure on your entire right hand if you're taking it like I do with two hands at a time. And if you're taking it one hand at a time, maybe you're leaning on your left leg, you're not standing up straight, things like that. And so what you can do instead is, instead of squeezing with your fingertips, you're going to take your hands, find the outside of the wrist and that radial artery, and then you're going to fulcrum your body forward and back. Let me explain what that looks like here, and then I'll show you a visual presentation as well. So if we have our patient's wrist, and here's their fingers coming out, and then we have that radial artery here within the wrist. We now need to make sure that we, first of all, place our hands in the right place every single time. And that means that the last metacarpal joint, in fact, the line that creates the last metacarpal joint on your middle finger, should find the peak right here of that process and then fold over. And so what that's going to look like is that every single time your finger will be on the same place on the pulse instead of finding random places, which is another place that I often see people go wrong, is that they're taking their fingers in different places every single time, and therefore they mean to be taking the guan, but they're actually taking the chir pulse, etc. So after you've taken the guan pulse, you're then going to want to fold in your other two fingers to take the sun and the guan pulse. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that if my patient is bigger than me, and I'm quite a tiny person, so oftentimes this is the case, I'm going to want to space my fingers a little bit wider on their wrist in order to take their true guan and chir pulse. And if the patient is smaller than me, which is not super frequent, I'm going to squeeze my fingertips together in order to find their guan and chir. So my finger is again wrapping around. Now what is the other half of my hand doing? So if this is their palm, on the other side of their wrist, we're going to kind of draw it like this. So this is their thumb and that's their index finger. right? On the other side of their wrist, here's like that LI4 point, right? I'm going to want to put my thumb right here in the center of the wrist to use it as a fulcrum. So my hand, if you notice where I put my thumb right in the center of my wrist, find the peak of the styloid process, fold my finger over, then put my fingers together because it's on me, they'll be right next to each other. And now my hand is in the same place for no matter whose pulse I'm taking every single time. So it makes sure that you're in the same position diagnostically every single time. Now you're ready to use your fulcrum. Now to use your fulcrum, you're going to want to lean forward, lean back, and come to the middle. Let me show you what that means. So when I take the pulse, imagine I have two hands here that I'm taking the pulse with. My thumb is on either side. I'm going to make sure that my hand position, once I take the pulse, does not change. So it always stays that way. And then my arm position is also going to stay the same. And so now all I have to do is lean forward from my dantian, come back up, and go to the middle. So why come up, down, and to the middle? That's because I'm trying to find the top, the bottom, and then the middle of the radial artery. So again, coming to the top of the radial artery, the bottom of the radial artery, and then the middle of the radial artery, all fulcruming on my dantian. So the movement here, my arms kind of stay like a mannequin. So like old school 80s pop lock. So we're going to keep our arms in that direction, or in that shape, I should say. And top, bottom, middle, top, bottom, middle. Now, I always do this twice because I don't trust myself. I want to make sure that I'm finding that top of the radial artery, the bottom, and then the middle every single time. Now that I've found the top, the bottom, and then the middle of the radial artery, my next question is, where is the pulse in relation to it? So when we think about the pulse in relation to the top, the bottom, and then the middle, we now can see where the pulse is lying and where it should be, and then where it is respectively. So let's say, for example, now that we know where the pulse should be ideally to have a little bit more strength in the middle jiao, right? A little bit of strength, a little bit of floating perhaps in the middle jiao. The sun is going to be middle-ish in the pulse, and then chur more than likely down here. Now that we know that this is normal, we can now understand what isn't normal. So let's say we have a floating pulse, a floating pulse that is full, for example, in the sun. So now we can see a floating pulse that is full in the sun is going to be here in the top of that radial artery when we palpate. Now, in relation to that, if the pulse is quite deep, we might see the pulse down here floating near the bottom of that radial artery. And if the pulse is very thin, it's not going to fill up as much space. So it might be right here in the artery. And if the pulse is quite full and big, like something we would see with someone who's quite constipated, we might see that pulse fill up the whole artery without room to expand and contract. So this is just a really quick video on how to understand the pulse from a visual perspective. Again, taking your pulse from being subjective to objective, all because we're doing something very simple and very traditional in Japanese acupuncture and moxibustion, and that is being really concerned about our posture. Now, the fulcrum is just one aspect of your posture. Remember, if you don't have 2 feet flat on the ground, you do not have correct posture. If you're not standing in the correct place in relation to your patient, it's also going to skew your results. If your fingertips, again, do not find that guan, does not find the peak of the bone here, it's also going to skew your results. So the reason why Japanese acupuncture is such sticklers for posture is because when we have standardized posture that's the same every single time, it takes the guesswork out of the practice. And so you're able to focus on how things are showing up rather than getting different results every single time with your pulse diagnosis. Now, this, of course, can be applied to all aspects of acupuncture. Mock question, your posture is very important for all different aspects. Saying that, if you're really interested in diving more into pulse diagnosis, in acupuncture and moxibustion posture, and really getting consistency and accuracy and efficiency, and most importantly, efficacy, right? Becoming more and more helpful for your clients during the treatment, then I highly encourage you to, again, check out that quiz below in the description box below. Let's see where you should start for your practice. You're also more than welcome to set up a call with me and see if traditional Japanese medicine, and particularly studying with me here in ShinKyu, is the right fit for you. You can find a link for that as well in the description box below. Thank you everyone for watching to the end of this. I highly respect your time, energy, and effort that you put into your practice. It helps us teach the algorithms of YouTube who needs this video so we can have a farther reaching effect with this channel and help more acupuncturists become more effective in their practice. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course share again. And if you're interested in really dialing in your pulse diagnosis and your posture in relation to the client, I highly recommend checking out this video right over here.